Throughout history, scientists have conducted some pretty messed up experiments. Some were disturbing, some were outright illegal, and some so insane they should have never happened. From mind control programs to Frankenstein-like creations, these experiments make you wonder, how did anyone ever think this was okay? And trust me, number one will haunt you. Welcome to Viral Top 10s, where we uncover the darkest, strangest, and most unbelievable facts from history. Today, we're diving into the most insane experiments that should have never happened. Be warned, this list gets real creepy real fast. Number 10, the Stanford prison experiment. When role-playing went horribly wrong, 1971. What happens when you put normal people in a fake prison and give some the role of guards and others prisoners? Turns out, absolute chaos. Lesson learned. Never give people power and tell them there are no consequences. In just a few days, the guards became abusive, the prisoners mentally broke down, and the experiment had to be shut down early because it got way too real. This was meant to study human behavior, but instead, it proved how quickly people can turn into monsters. Number 9, the monster study, turning kids into stutterers, 1939. In 1939, researchers wanted to study the effects of speech therapy. Sounds innocent, right? Well, their idea of an experiment was to take orphaned children and deliberately make them develop a stutter. Because nothing says science like ruining children's ability to speak. Half of the kids were praised for their speech, while the other half were criticized and shamed into stuttering. Many of them never recovered, proving that this experiment was as cruel as it was pointless. Number 8. Project MK-Ultra, the CIA's mind control program, 1950s to 70s. This one's straight out of a spy thriller, except it was very, very real. The CIA ran MK-Ultra, a top-secret project where they drugged people, tortured them, and experimented with mind control. So basically, the government was out here playing real-life X-Men, but way worse. Subjects were given LSD without their consent, locked in sensory deprivation tanks, and subjected to psychological torture, all to see if the U.S. could create real-life sleeper agents. When the program was leaked in the 1970s, the government tried to cover it up, but it was too late. Number 7, the Russian sleep experiment, alleged 1940s. One of the most disturbing experiments ever rumored was the Russian sleep experiment, where Soviet scientists allegedly locked 5 prisoners in a sealed chamber and deprived them of sleep for 15 days. The goal? To see what happens when humans are pushed past their limits. The result? Absolute horror. And I thought pulling an all-nighter was bad. These guys went full psycho mode. By day 5, the subjects were hallucinating. By day 10, they stopped responding. And by day 15, they were mutilating themselves and begging to stay awake. While many believe this story is an urban legend, the fact that Soviet experiments were actually this extreme makes you wonder, could it have been real? Number 6, Unit 731, Japan's Nightmare Factory, 1930s to 40s. During World War II, Japan ran Unit 731, a research lab where thousands of people were subjected to the most horrific experiments imaginable. From biological weapon testing to live dissections without anesthesia, this wasn't science. It was a real-life horror movie. Oh, you thought Nazi experiments were the worst? Japan said, hold my sake. Victims were frozen alive, had their limbs amputated, and reattached to different parts of the body, and were injected with diseases to study their effects. Even worse, after the war, many of the scientists were granted immunity in exchange for their research. Number 5, the Tuskegee Syphilis Study, 1932 to 1972. For 40 years, the U.S. government knowingly let hundreds of black men suffer from syphilis, just so doctors could observe the effects of the disease without treating them. Even after penicillin became available as a cure, they were never given the treatment. Imagine signing up for free health care and finding out they're just watching you die. The experiment was finally exposed in 1972, and the public outrage led to major medical ethics reforms. But the fact that this went on for 4 decades is terrifying, and people wonder why there's mistrust in the healthcare system. Number 4, Head Transplants, the 2-headed dog experiment, 1954. Soviet scientist Vladimir Demikov thought, you know what's a great idea? Surgically attaching a second head onto a dog. So that's exactly what he did, multiple times. Frankenstein was just a book. This guy said, nah, let's make it real. Shockingly, the 2-headed dogs actually survived for a few days before dying due to rejection from their immune systems. While Demikov claimed this research was meant to advance organ transplants, it was more like a mad scientist horror show. Number 3, The Little Albert Experiment, 1920. Ever wonder if fear can be taught? Well, in 1920, psychologists took a baby named Albert and decided to turn him into a living science project. Their goal? To condition him to be afraid of things he originally liked. So basically, they turned a baby into a real-life horror protagonist. Little Albert was exposed to fluffy animals, but every time he touched one, scientists banged a loud metal rod behind him. The result? He developed an intense fear of anything soft and fluffy. The worst part? No one knows what happened to Albert after the study. Number 2. The Elephant on LSD, 1962. In what might be the most pointless experiment ever, a group of scientists in 1962 wanted to see what happened when they gave an elephant LSD. But instead of a small dose, they gave it enough for 3,000 humans. Because normal science wasn't chaotic enough. The poor elephant immediately collapsed and died. The scientists later claimed it died from shock, not the LSD. But then another group tested it again at a lower dose. And the elephant was fine, meaning they just straight up overdosed the first elephant. Number 1. The Nazi twin experiments. Josef Mengele's horror lab, 1940s. The absolute worst experiment on this list, Josef Mengele's Nazi twin experiments. Mengele, also known as the Angel of Death, performed unspeakable horrors on twins in concentration camps. He wanted to study genetic similarities by doing the most inhumane tests imaginable. This guy wasn't a doctor. He was a full-blown horror villain. Mengele sewed twins together, injected chemicals into their eyes, and performed unnecessary amputations, all without anesthesia. Even after the war, he escaped to South America and was never caught. It's a dark reminder of how twisted science can become in the wrong hands. And there you have it. 7 of the most insane experiments that should have never happened. From psychological nightmares to actual horror movie level cruelty. These experiments prove that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. So, which one disturbed you the most? And real question, how did some of these people even call themselves scientists? Drop your thoughts in the comments if you can sleep tonight. If this video shocked you, hit that like button and subscribe for more crazy history and mind-blowing facts. Thanks for watching Viral Top 10s. See you next time. Unless we end up in a weird experiment first.